Disclaimer: this is my personal opinion on how art interacts with the spirit. I'm not claiming it to be objective truth, but rather hope to generate interesting dialogues on the metaphysical concept. Tsutomu Nihei's 67-chapter manga Blam follows the journey of Provisional Safeguard Unit Killy as he traverses an enormous abandoned megastructure endlessly expanded by construction robots. While the manga's world building is incredibly complex, containing a history spanning thousands of years and a story featuring many different races, factions, and incomprehensibly futuristic technology, very little dialogue or even description can be found to demystify it. Instead, readers are presented with 400 pages of artwork depicting vast, brutalist cityscapes devoid of human life, as our hero makes his way to the surface. There are many who attempt to understand the dense lore hidden within these panels, but there is another way to read this piece that ends with an alternatively powerful experience. The song playing in the background is from a mix I created back during quarantine. Titled Dystopian Cyberpunk Doomer Mix Volume 1, it features a delicious mix of ambient cocktail lounge jazz, psychedelic R&B, and vaporwave, many songs of which would now be attributed to the genre barber beats. While reading Blam and viewing other pieces of futuristic anime, I considered city pop and the other exciting styles of vibrant Japanese jazz fusion generally associated with retrofuturism, but ultimately felt more of a connection between the cyberpunk aesthetic and the lonely emptiness expressed within barber beats. To say that it was a profound experience to read through Blam while listening to this mix would be an understatement. While traversing through this lonely world, visually and sonically, I felt as if I was the only one in the entire world. Like I was the only one in the universe capable of experiencing the feelings I was experiencing, while exploring the seemingly infinite abandoned megastructure. It almost felt spiritual, as if I had transcended the realm humans were currently capable of existing within. A similar experience has been reportedly felt by many when listening to and viewing the project, Everywhere at the End of Time, currently the most profound piece of media I have ever had the privilege of consuming. With music composed, or more appropriately lo-fied, by James Leland Kirby, and oil paintings done by Ivan Seal, this 6.5-hour-long piece of media, humbly made accessible to us through YouTube, takes the listener on a metaphysical journey through the 6 stages of dementia, employing slowly deteriorating ballroom swing and ragtime music to stimulate memory displacement and then loss over time. With each stage, the music becomes increasingly incomprehensible, and the oil paintings more abstract as the mental degradations progress on the mind of the subject. By using reverb, delay, and saturation, Kirby's ballroom remixes are made beautifully eerie, looped to a soul-crushing degree, and sprinkled over Ivan Seal's terrifying paintings. These indecipherable works scream at you to find any trace of familiarity within them, and laugh in your face when you realize you're as lost as someone with dementia. The confidence of the art and the music through heavy sonic and visual manipulation helps it assert its control over your consciousness. The disease has now taken the wheel, and you will be at its mercy for the next 7 hours. There's much to be said about the significance of the early stages of the piece and their remarkable ability to set up identifiable memories and then recall those memories in the later stages. However, I want to talk about something this work does that I haven't seen many do, and that is its act of basically transcending death. Death is something we inherently have no way of experiencing twice, and it has fascinated our human race since its dawn. Many have attempted to depict it through artwork with mere earthly projections. More have tried to escape it, only to find it knocking at their door. Everything in our world seems to have a ticking clock or time limit governed by physics. It is even predicted that in as little as 22 billion years, the universe itself will meet its death. Death is not an exclusively human thing. It is a physical principle of our entire world. We can't see beyond it, we can't escape it, and we can't experience it more than once. But through Everywhere at the End of Time, we get a remarkably close look at it and what even might come after it. The last section of Stage 6 is titled Place in the World Fades Away, and it does a heartbreakingly sublime job of letting the listener truly die. The canvas facing away from us tells us that there is absolutely nothing left of the mind, the powerful ambience behind it evident of this emptiness. We wait in patience as it dissolves and then slowly begins to transcend into a new state of being, one beyond what we can experience in this life. The trials of the new journey are peaceful as we accept our fate, but frightening as we have no idea what remains ahead. I see a light shining down from the heavens as the piece climaxes, ending with a 5-minute choral performance that does nothing else but depict the death of a human and the fading away of their place on Earth. No piece has been more utterly life-changing for me than this one. It seems to take your soul out of the traditionally accepted physical spatial dimensions and onto something outside of the realm we as humans can currently comprehend. Audiovisual media has not been the only phenomenon credited with rousing soul-transcending euphoria. In fact, on a given basis, it only engages one or two of the senses. Imagine being able to live inside of a piece of art, to be able to touch, feel, and explore its physical structure, to engage with its different elements of lighting, its acoustics, the boundaries of its form, even to smell the odors and hear reverberations bouncing off of its surfaces, whatever their makeup may be. Imagine being able to become physically lost in a structure with an awe-like composure, so devoid of human life, order, and coherency that it appears alien, or almost transdimensional. The act of urban exploring was an activity of my past, usually partaken with friends and other voyagers willing to brave the unknown depths of the abandoned structures we found. The thrill of these expeditions mostly originated from the risk, which induced a powerful adrenaline rush that was rarely felt throughout average daily life. The idea of planning missions with friends, traveling long distances, and uncovering secrets that hadn't seen the light of day in years was extremely attractive to me, inspiring an obsession with the hobby. However, there was much more to the activity than vicariously living in a bland architectural cosplay. After exploring one structure so uncannily eerie it recalled scenes from dreams I had delved into in my early childhood years, I renamed the term urbex to liminal tourism. The goal had changed from having an adventurous night out with friends to partaking in an experience parallel to the act of transcending dimensions. We now had the ability to take a walk in the popular liminal spaces advertised to us on the internet, only using the third dimension. It was like we had no clipped into the back rooms, but could leave at any time. If you are not completely sure of what constitutes pop culture's definition of a liminal space, there are a few universal traits that compose one. Initially, liminal spaces are images of locations we consider non-places, less focused on geographic points that generally exist within man-made structures. These places are usually areas designed as passing spaces in between destinations and are mostly unremarkable. Such areas can be empty hallways, waiting rooms, stairwells, or parking lots. Portraying these settings as if they were the ultimate destination rather than a point on the journey creates a certain eerie loneliness, instilling the feeling of being trapped between reality and an infinite abyss of purposeless architecture. The second principle of these images is their consistent lack of people. The exclusion of human or even animal life in these already uncanny places doesn't just increase their hostility, but also implies the idea that they somehow came into existence without the help of humanity. This principle is exhibited in the fictional dimension of the backrooms, a theoretical plane between realities consisting of nothing but 600 million square miles of abandoned office rooms. The backrooms and other liminal spaces always possess a mysterious dreamlike uncanniness, usually provoking some form of anemoic nostalgia. This effect is achieved through high contrast lighting, saturation, and lowered resolution effects like sharpness, noise, and haze. It should also be mentioned that many spaces deemed liminal are shot in postmodern buildings in places that would likely be nostalgic to someone who grew up in the 90s or early 2000s. Being a few decades older than the decor and design we are currently surrounded by in contemporary society, these photos contain a haunting image of the past we grew up in when our minds weren't fully developed. The playgrounds, malls, and gas stations in these images reference memories our mind can't fully piece together without using non-canon filler information from our dreams. As powerful as they are, the eerie nostalgic feeling felt when indulging in these images only has a fraction of the profundity experienced when exploring them in real life. I'm privileged to say I've experienced an expedition akin to no clipping into the actual backrooms, and it has still been one of the most powerful moments of my entire life. Listening to a haunting selection of low-fidelity music while trekking through those seemingly endless abandoned hallways gave me a feeling I couldn't seem to define with words. It was almost as if my soul had transcended into another dimension, along with my consciousness at that. It was the farthest I had ever felt from the physical waking world, from humanity itself. Why am I spending so much time talking about these drastically unrelated experiences as if they are part of the same franchise? They don't belong to the same medium or even form, exhibiting works from music, literature, easel art, and even architecture. So why do they consistently instill such specifically profound emotions, even through these drastic differences? A young art critic once claimed, "Good art allows its patron to live in a time or a place that is currently inaccessible to them, while great art causes its patrons to feel as though they've lived an entire life in a realm that has never existed before and never will." This quote is so far from objective truth that it wouldn't be practical to analyze any art under its principles. However, it helps smoothly introduce us to interdimensional art theory, a system I developed for cataloging art based on its profundity and effect on the soul. On my quest to define profundity, I initially tried using physics to quantify the value of art. I thought this might work since everything in our universe is technically governed by its physical principles. This, of course, hit a dead end when I realized that all art is subjective and can't be measured with any type of math or science. This revelation was incredibly important for helping me begin to define the spiritual nature of the works I discussed. But before I explain their relation, it is important to understand why interdimensional art theory fails to accurately value the emotional effects of this art. Surrealism hasn't always been my favorite art movement, but it has consistently had the most powerful effect on me of any style I've observed. I've certainly appreciated surrealism's uncanniness, abstraction, and unconventional nature, but what has always seemed to captivate me the most was its power to recall feelings I had only previously felt in dreams. I don't know when you will be watching this video, but most of you will be tuning in at a time in humanity when we know very little about dreams. While dreams are some of the most powerful experiences our subconscious can undergo, we know less about them than we do the ocean. We have no way to record or reproduce them, or even the feelings and stimulations felt within them. They're truly an enigma little in the waking world can come close to representing. Now, most people aren't incredibly active dreamers, even though all of us have the potential to be. But I've been actively dreaming for nearly a decade and have experienced many profound situations, such as a lucid dream that spanned 2 entire days with time dilation, a roughly 4.5-year-long dream embedded within 5 layers of dreamline continuity, and even a time when I had 7 false awakenings in a row. As an avid lucid dreamer, vivid dreamer, and one who has heavily experimented with time dilation, I can say that dreams have had an extremely important role in my life. In trying to understand their powerful effect on my soul and how it has been paralleled by art, I initially had the idea that dreams were stories from other dimensions. While this is unlikely, it opened up the idea of the 5th dimension and the parallel universes within it. Was surrealism simply a weird art movement trying and failing to illustrate dreams, or was it a way for us third-dimensional beings to impossibly peer into the wonders of the 5th? String theory tells us that there are 10 possible dimensions governing all of existence within our universe and outside of it. Theorist Rob Bryanton has a remarkably accessible method for visualizing these theoretical higher spatial dimensions, which are explored in a video I have linked in the description. For a concise explanation, I will try to speedrun us through them. Bear in mind, I am no physicist. If the 0th dimension is a point in a system, the 1st dimension is a line, only containing length. The 2nd dimension adds another line at 90 degrees to the 1st line, creating width. The 3rd dimension folds the 2nd dimension over on itself, adding depth. We are currently in the 3rd dimension where objects possess mass. The 4th dimension is duration. Here we can visualize the effects of time over an object across its lifespan. In the 5th dimension, we have access to all the possible universes that can be created by our own choices, the actions of others, and chance. In the 6th dimension, we have access to every possible timeline of our universe, even the ones that our current timeline isn't related to. This will contain all infinite versions of our universe, from its conception to its death. If you imagine the 6th dimension as a point in a system, the 7th dimension adds another point in this system, creating a line. That second point represents all possible timelines of an alternate universe, one that developed differently than our own, with different initial conditions that govern its laws of nature. It is a completely separate infinity. If we add another point representing another infinity with a different initial condition discrepancy, we are now in the 8th dimension. We can use the 9th dimension to jump from one infinity to another unconnected infinity in the 8th dimension. Lastly, we use the 10th dimension to represent all possible timelines for all possible infinities within the 9th dimension. All possibilities are contained within this 10th dimension. Phew, yeah, I know that wasn't a great explanation, but we're not going to use it for accuracy. We're going to use it for an analogy. When developing interdimensional art theory, my goal was to understand where the profound nature of surrealism and other spiritually moving pieces of art originated from. The one thing that all these pieces had in common was, they seemed to transcend our world and climactically end in a place that never seemed like it could feasibly exist within the 3rd dimension. While the idea of traveling to other planets within our solar system, or even anywhere in space, is already quite surreal, it doesn't seem to have the same effect as the idea of traversing the higher dimensions. They're just so much more abstract and mystical than our massive galaxy can even be. With that in mind, I decided that pure surrealism and other spiritual art must be a gateway to at least the 6th dimension, if not the higher dimensions. But by claiming this, I realized I had to define the other dimensions by the art represented within them. So here's the system I came up with. The third dimension, consisting of length, width, and depth, represents us and our memories. It is the human experience in a snapshot, without any amount of stylization or editing. Third-dimensional art is daily life through the perspective of our eyes and nothing more. A watered-down description of the fourth dimension is time. While the fourth dimension is still a spatial dimension just like the others, for the sake of this analogy, we can imagine that it simply represents the timeline of humanity within our current universe and nothing more. Any works of nonfiction will allow us to traverse back and forth across this timeline. We can go back as far as history will allow us, and since history has such a consistent tendency to repeat itself, we can even use fourth-dimensional art to imagine the future. While pieces of art within the fourth dimension, such as historical reports and realist paintings, can feature incredible craftsmanship, beauty, and profundity, they are not necessarily otherworldly, representational of events that genuinely happened during humanity's timeline. I will mention that besides film and photography, there are no forms of art that can objectively capture some historical events without some amount of stylization, bias, or human error, and even film finds a way of doing this. With that in mind, I consider fourth-dimensional art to be anything that was intentionally designed to be an authentic report of something, a letter, a document, a portrait, etc. Now this line can easily get blurred. Was Aphra-Behn's Orinoco a genuine travelogue, or a piece of realist fiction loosely based on her experiences in 17th century Suriname? What about historical accounts that we can't prove the legitimacy of? How much of the Bible is actual history versus allegory? As you can see, the analogy quickly crumbles, shattering its effectiveness. But if we ignore this fault and continue moving up the dimensions, we will begin to see where the line between spiritual and earthly art starts to form. For simplicity's sake, we will consider the fifth dimension a system that houses any possible version of our universe in which humanity has evolved in a similar way to how it has now. With this principle in mind, fifth-dimensional art is anything that is fictitious within this universe, but historic in any of the parallel versions of it. Obviously, any work of realistic fiction is considered fifth-dimensional, as with infinity in mind, it likely exists as fact in a parallel universe. Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway is a work of fiction within our current universe, but if we believe in our definition of the fifth dimension, there is a universe where the events of the book have actually happened. A lot of sci-fi makes the cut as well. Take the Marvel franchise, for example. While it is unrealistic, its cinematic universe contains New York, a United States, and an Earth very similar to our own. With infinity in mind, we have to imagine the possibility of a man named Tony Stark being born in one of the universes and creating the Iron Man suit. If there is a universe with the conditions to support these events, they exist. Fiction not referencing our solar system, such as Star Wars or fantastic works like Lord of the Rings, can simply be imagined to exist in other galaxies or in a point in time when life has evolved to suit these storylines. However, you can see where our definition of fifth-dimensional art begins to falter when we try to compare it to sixth-dimensional art. When beginning this project, the goal was to use string theory's 10-dimension to discover where surreal art originated from and separate it from objective art. Before formulating the analogy, I hypothesized that surreal and spiritual works must originate from the sixth dimension, as most of them don't have any objective meaning within our current universe, or even within the imagined versions of it achievable through choice and chance. I placed worlds in this category such as David Lynch's Eraserhead and Twin Peaks, not just because of their surreal atmosphere, but because of the way their characters exchange dialogue. David Lynch's characters are not humans that evolved within any universe connected to ours through the fifth dimension. I argue this not because of anything to do with their biology, but because of how they interact with one another compared to the way any characters within the fifth dimensional pieces described interact with each other. Lynch's subjects don't even speak in coherent language much of the time, and when they do, it feels alien, as if they evolved in a different version of the universe that couldn't possibly be connected to our timeline. With as much sci-fi insanity as happens in the Marvel universe, even when characters are literally traveling to other dimensions, their speech patterns and mannerisms remain exactly the same as ours. Thor is literally from another dimension with different physics, meaning that it would only be accessible from the seventh dimension or a higher one, and the man just acts like a regular dude half the time. I get that Marvel needs to make their characters more accessible to the general public, but come on, if you ask me, this franchise doesn't take you further than the fifth dimension. With this in mind, we can see where David Lynch's subjects go from being purely fictional to completely inaccessible within the fifth dimension. Through Lynch's films, we are able to see into a world impossible to access by choice and chance, taking us further than we have ever gone from our humble world. Now, nothing can technically be proven to be seventh-dimensional art, so we have no way of knowing exactly what a seventh-dimensional world might be like. But we do know that the most significant differentiating principles of these worlds will be their initial fundamental conditions. The biggest difference between a possible seventh dimensional universe and a possible sixth dimensional universe will be their differing laws of nature. While it is said that entropy exists in the higher dimensions, gravity might work differently in one of these universes. The speed of light might be completely different. We have no way of knowing. But we do know what the principles of our universe are, and can make educated guesses on what differences seventh dimensional worlds might contain. However, art representing these worlds is purely hypothetical. I like to place David Lynch's Black Lodge in the category of seventh dimensional art, as its physics don't seem to work the same way as they would in our universe. I'm talking about the way time flows, indicated by sound. In the Black Lodge, all the sounds are reversed for some reason, indicating that either sonic energy works differently here, or that the flow of time is nonlinear. Either way, this place does not appear to be something that could exist in any version of our universe due to its set initial fundamental principles. But my analogy stops here and begins to fall apart. If the physics of these higher dimensions are different, we might not be able to view, hear, or feel them within our own. There is no way to tell what counts as seventh dimensional versus what might technically exist in the sixth or even the fifth dimension due to some anomaly. And what are the odds that humans would even evolve into existence in a seventh dimensional world? It is incredibly unlikely, and not even preferred, since the whole point of escaping to these worlds through art is to disconnect from humanity and explore alternatives. That said, seventh dimensional art would likely have to be devoid of all humans, lack any recognizable language, and generally be completely and utterly abstract with no meaning we could even piece together. Even if there was meaning to it, we likely wouldn't be able to visualize such due to the severe change in initial fundamental principles. But even with all these problems in mind, another problem arises, and that is that even though we are escaping our own universe and diving into the theoretical higher dimensions using surrealism, we are still trying to find an objective meaning. We are still trying to solve an equation that evidently seems like it can't be solved, and it can't, because art is not limited to any equation, physics, or even the 10 dimensions. It actually goes even further. Let's take a look at this quote again with more context. Rather than using the statement to quantify the objective value of a piece of art, we can imagine it to be the defining principle separating objective art from transdimensional art. We can replace great with this new term and imagine that this non-existent realm refers to the metaphysical spirit world that can seemingly only be accessed from here through this specifically profound type of art. With this new definition of surreal/spiritual art, we have now come to the conclusion that its significance is not in helping us visualize projections of the higher dimensions, but in helping us view something beyond the 10th dimension, something that isn't physical or tangible, something only souls can traverse. Due to the lack of scientific research helping us define this metaphysical location, we will refer to it as the spirit realm, the place your soul and consciousness appear to arrive at when effectively consuming these powerful transcendent works of art. So what exactly is transdimensional art? Oscar Wilde famously once said, "Life imitates art far more than art imitates life." But what if neither imitate one another? What if a work of art is so disconnected from reality that there can be no connections found between it and humanity, with nothing for us to imitate in return? It would be like looking into an impossible infinity, completely inverse from the infinity of our 10th dimension, a realm that we can't imagine to tangibly exist, even within the range of the entire omniverse. Transdimensional art is any art that succeeds in generating such encounters within our souls. Its goal is to help us disassociate with reality as much as possible in order to explore alternatives to humanity, to the timeline of our universe, and to anything else contained within the 10 spatial dimensions. It takes us as far from our theoretical location in this system as it possibly can, while triggering the spiritual orgasm, a euphoric revelation felt with the realization that there are greater powers at work than even those that make up the universe. I have felt these waves of ecstasy and can tell you firsthand that they must be some of the best feelings in the world, likely producing as much dopamine as chemical stimulants would, if not more. I'm not joking. When fully connected to such a piece of transdimensional art, you might feel as though your soul has transcended up to an invisible astral plane, so powerful and vivid you now understand that it exists, even when you realize that it isn't housed within the 10 spatial dimensions. It is something you can't see, but can powerfully feel, emanating from somewhere beyond reality.
Now you know how nice it feels. Scatter good seed in the field. Life's ours for the making. It
Why is escaping reality so difficult? Going back to interdimensional art theory, you might notice that I have placed transdimensional art in a higher dimension than things like nonfiction and fiction, works of which I consider to be objective art. I don't believe transdimensional art is necessarily higher quality than other art, but it is objectively more rare and likely always will be. There are a few reasons for this. To start with, it is basically impossible for a human being to make something without reflecting some shred of humanity in it, and even AI will draw from human art to come up with its amalgamations. Therefore, one way we might attempt to create dimension-transcending art is by crafting works that treat themselves like they are made for dimensionally transcendental beings rather than humans. Hilma af Klint, a Swedish artist credited with inventing abstraction, did just that. She spent her early life as a realist painter, but became obsessed with spirituality and the occult after the death of her 10-year-old sister. Experimenting with mysticism and theosophy, she claimed to have established contact with spiritual beings she called the High Masters. While undergoing an otherworldly experience during a seance, these beings apparently told her to make paintings on the astral plane that would design the temple for the New Kingdom. From 1906 to 1915, she created a series of 193 works titled The Paintings for the Temple. These vibrant abstract works appear to be very conscious and specific in their composition, but don't seem to reference anything that appears comprehensible on Earth. If any work of art is truly transdimensional, these pieces certainly get pretty close. However, as illustrated in this situation, we find that it is incredibly rare for someone to have such an experience and effectively ingrain it within their work. Not only are the chances of divine intervention incredibly low, but the craftsmanship needed to convey such moments exceeds the capabilities of most artists. So rather than waiting around for the spirit world to come to them, most transdimensional artists rather attempt to synthesize spiritual transcendence themselves. The main challenge in doing so lies in the inability to define what constitutes a spiritual orgasm. It is such an abstract and enigmatic concept that most of the time it is an occurrence more likely to be triggered by accident than on purpose. The incredibly precise set of circumstances needed to come together to formulate such an experience reflect the spectacularity of natural diamonds developing in a kimberlite pipe. Genuine works of transdimensional art are proper anomalies. Finding one is like finding a needle in a haystack that happens to cure polio. But this works to its advantage. Transdimensional art's short supply ultimately helps enhance its significance and increases its potency when consumed. Of course, people want what they can't have. The grass is always greener on the other side of the astral plane. But there must be more to it than that. There must be a reason why escaping reality is so appealing, besides the fact that it can rarely be done successfully. Well, what does it mean to live a good life as a human? Prosperity on Earth is generally something well sought after by most of us. We want to experience love and human connection, live comfortably, and enjoy the delights life has to offer, but at the end of the day, our lives are incredibly insignificant. It doesn't matter what we do during our lifetime, no matter how much money we obtain, power we acquire, or influence we enact, it will all become completely forgotten and rendered meaningless. Our lifespan is too short for us to really experience a change in the universe that will truly alter our perception, and even the universe itself has a time limit. The accepted reality that everything we've ever known and everything that will ever be will one day cease to exist puts us in a box that makes life appear completely futile. So we scrounge around and search for cosmological meaning until we come to transdimensional art, a vehicle that avenges us from our spatial imprisonment, takes us to a plane existent outside of time and reality. So how can we define transdimensional art? Well, if created under purist standards, this type of art is temporally disconnected from the 10th dimension, a trait that paradoxically increases its value to humanity. Timelessness is a characteristic aspired for in great works of art because it gives a work the ability to be objectively relatable across a timeline, even through evolutionary events. When a piece of art is timeless, it is more widely relatable to the human race, or in the case of the dimensionally extraneous, unrelatable. Transdimensional art employs timelessness in this unique way. Rather than being so simple and abstract that it will be recognizable by all humans, it is so metaphysically complex that it generally isn't fully comprehensible to anyone, even its creator. By making a piece universally unrelatable, its fantasized origins have been removed from the timeline and now exist in a separate realm, unreachable from our world. Such pieces of art do not discriminate against viewers based on wealth, race, class, or age because they usually hold no preferences for any specific background. They have so little objective meaning that they will be understood just as poorly by someone in the year 2000 as the year 200 or even the year 20,000. These pieces can't be comprehended now and will never be fully comprehensible even in the future. However, they still remain potent, separated from the rest of the world, the rest of the timeline, and even the 10th dimension. This is their similarity with stimulating drugs. Most dopamine-inducing drugs have a powerful effect on the nervous system that will remain the same as long as human biology remains similar. With this in mind, drugs might have the same effect on the first human as they will the last human. They provide a synthetic euphoria not naturally accessible to humans, except within the subconscious through dreams. Anyone who has experienced a good trip or a powerful hit can tell you that drugs are more powerful than most feelings you will experience naturally. As I have said, the spiritual orgasm parallels these feelings, but it is something that is achieved under complete sobriety. By discovering a way to experience these feelings naturally, we have superseded human biology. Now, if that's not enough to get you interested in transdimensional art, I don't know what is. So what actually counts as transdimensional art? Well, by its strict standards, nothing. Unfortunately, no piece of art can be abstract and simultaneously complex enough to give every single person in the history of the universe the same euphoric experience. We also run into the same problems as we did with fourth dimensional art. Every piece of art created by humans or AI will find itself dated and tainted by preference in some way, be it the type of media available at the time, the artist's inability to disassociate with the universe, or simple human error. And if we're being honest, relatability is going to be a pretty significant factor in triggering a powerful spiritual orgasm within a particular subject. So we have to look at art in a different way. Rather than trying to find works that technically manage to fit all of these specific criteria, we more importantly look for works that effectively achieve the defined spiritual orgasm. When discovering these works, we will find that many of them are still loosely based around the discussed principles of unrelatability, timelessness, and abstraction, helping them stand out from more objective pieces of art. Agreeing that spiritual transcendence trumps universal relatability, we have to accept the fact that everyone's situation is going to be completely different. All of these experiences will be united by their ability to transcend a soul, but this kind of euphoria will likely require vastly different pieces of art to be achieved. With that in mind, our new mission will be to find any works of art that might have the ability to do this, no matter the genre or the medium. These works will be by nature pseudo-transdimensional, since many of them will not be fully abstract, timeless, or universally incomprehensible. However, since they all have succeeded in generating some level of spiritual orgasm, and for the sake of simplicity, we will consider them transdimensional. Let's examine a few works of art that have effectively triggered these profound spiritual experiences in my life. When watching the indie horror feature film Skinamarink by Kyle Edward Ball, I momentarily left reality and looked back on it from inside the perspective of the film. This was the first movie I ever saw that genuinely took away my ability to deduce whether I was awake or dreaming. While many have said that it is the most boring horror film they have ever seen, others have claimed that it is the most disturbing, and I have to agree with the latter. Almost plotless, the film features nearly 2 hours of barely comprehensible stills in a darkly lit house within which two children wake up in the middle of the night to find their parents missing. As they walk around the house, its doors and windows begin to mysteriously vanish, entrapping them in what appears to be a never-ending night cycle. The rest of the film is made up of extremely long stills depicting random areas of the house. These locations are always dimly lit and noisy, appearing very reminiscent of what it might look like to wake up in the middle of the night and glance around before your eyes have adjusted to the light. This phenomenon is just what happened to me during my first viewing of this film. Knowing very little about what I was getting myself into, I got back from a party around midnight and decided to stay up 2 more hours to watch it. Living in a college dorm room with 2 other dudes, I was on the bottom bunk of a bunk bed and had built something of a canopy encompassing my mattress, giving myself a little privacy. Already cut off from the rest of the world, basically living in a subterranean pillow fort, I decided to also use in-ear monitors so that I wouldn't wake up my roommates. This was either the worst or best possible way to watch this film, as it basically cut off all of my senses from the outside world and gave me the most objective viewing conditions for the film. This perspective was also a remarkably appropriate viewing angle. A large amount of the film consists of scenes around a bed or on a carpet where the children can be found playing or sleeping. Many of these shots depict low-angle perspective of the floor, exhibiting Lego sets or other toys the kids are using. Watching this while laying in my bed curled around a laptop placed me in a similar vertical position to the one displayed in these shots. This caused the movie to transcend from merely being something on my computer screen to becoming my entire waking perspective. This placement, combined with the noise cancellation from my IEMs, made it so that 3 of my senses were now deprived from reality and re-injected into the film itself. As I watched the film, I started to grow extremely tired as it was after midnight and it was very dark in my viewing space. I actually began to drift off to sleep at one point, woken up by the sparse sounds of the film. When my eyes opened, I couldn't tell whether I was awake or dreaming. The cinematic universe of the movie had become my new base for reality, and true reality was only something to look back on. Just like the kids in the movie, I had woken up to a twisted nightmare, finding myself trapped in the house, experiencing the same struggles as them whilst we attempted to escape together. With the sleep deprivation in full drive, this movie truly took my consciousness out of its existing spatial dimension and onto the realm of hypnagogia. My personal experience with this film was incredibly subjective, not just through the viewing conditions I experienced, but also through my connection to its choice of aesthetic. Using techniques from the microgenre branding strategy we call core, this film heavily exercised the nostalgia effect. Such examples of nostalgification include the use of what is now considered dementiacore, a genre of low-fidelity music usually made from old American big band tunes that have been slowed down, chopped up, and eerily looped, finished off with added vibrato and vinyl crackle. Obviously, listening to Ever at the End of Time made me appreciate the surreal technique for inducing haunting nostalgia, so I already had some personal preference. Aside from its slightly subjective soundtrack, everyone who isn't blind can agree on how accurately this film portrays darkness and the fears it induced when we were young. Through the use of static and hazy blue light emission, this film crafts the dreamlike atmosphere experienced when waking up as a child late at night. I still have fuzzy memories of staying at my grandparents' house deep into the night for dinner. When my usual bedtime came around, my mom would put me to sleep in a bed in the back room. I remember slowly falling asleep as the light shone through the cracks in the doorway began to dissipate. The babbling conversations of the adults became more distorted and incomprehensible as I slipped into slumber. When the adults were ready to leave, my mom would pick me up and take me back home. This usually woke me up, but it was always something of a surreal half-sleep. Things were barely recognizable. There would generally be some blue haze combating warm yellow lights. My memory could never fully piece together a coherent picture of what had happened. It just remained a lost memory I could only fantasize about in dreams. Now, being old enough to stay up through dinner with a brain developed enough to remember the events of the previous night, as long as it wasn't a Friday out with the boys, I haven't had the privilege of experiencing this phenomenon of waking hypnagogia since early childhood. Skinamarink, the wonder that it is, gives us a chance to transcend time and go back to childhood, reliving these mysterious sleepy transitions from hazy consciousness to slumber. I consider it to be transdimensional because when I am within its grasp, I not only return to the time when I was a child, I return to the time when I was a child trapped between two realities, a state of mind not quite conscious, but not yet dreaming. The existence of this state of limbo has always fascinated me, as it is a place we can tangibly transcend to on a regular basis, but not a spatial one. Its laws are truly governed by our consciousness, maybe even by our soul. While not everyone will have the same experience watching Skinamarink, its lack of dialogue and visible characters causes its primary focus to be on the perplexity of uncertainty, as we can't definitively tell what might await us in its darkened rooms. Since all human beings have experienced the sensation of being lost in the dark at some point, and many have spent an amount of time in a man-made structure, this film should be quite accessible to most. While it will never be universally relatable, its craft will be remarkable to many as a solid example of possible transdimensional art. In addition to sensorial deprivation, sensorial immersion is one of the most powerful techniques that can be used to induce a spiritual orgasm. One unseemingly successful way to achieve this effect is through the popular internet trend of conglomerative aesthetic. Such aesthetics combine multiple genres, mediums, and forms of art to create an art imagination that is visually, sonically, and even physically stimulating. I attempted to create a new branch off of the cyberpunk aesthetic by combining Japanese dystopian futurism with the slowed-down house-style jazz of barber beats. By combining a genre of music with a popular art trend, I created something of a multimedia art aesthetic, one I deemed dystopian cyberpunk doomer. While that was a notably successful venture, and I would love to see others combine haircuts for men songs with their favorite frames of anime brutalism, no other art aesthetic has quite had the same spiritual effect on me as that of Vaporwave. discovered Vaporwave right when I was getting into the dangerously addictive hobby of tropical fruit tree collection, right at the peak of lockdown, which might have been the perfect environment for its conception within my mind. It quickly became my favorite musical genre, my favorite art aesthetic, and then my entire lifestyle, an exciting ride I am still a part of and will stick with until the end. How can an internet art trend contain enough information to become an entire lifestyle? To answer this simple question, we must break down the anatomy of Vaporwave and its context in the history of Western music. Vaporwave, like other forms of sample-based low-fidelity internet music, is made up of samples from a form of jazz. While Dementia Core samples 30s jazz, Lo-Fi samples 50s jazz, and Barber Beats sample 90s jazz, Vaporwave primarily samples smooth jazz and gospel from the 70s and 80s. While possible samples are not limited to these genres or eras, they are overwhelmingly abundant throughout Vaporwave's catalog. Smooth jazz and gospel contain large amounts of sus4 chords, which are devoured by Vaporwave, especially the dominant 13 sus4 chord, arguably the most profound single chord in Western harmonic vocabulary. It's so optimistic yet so sad. Songs that aren't within these genres but use a similar harmony will be sampled to achieve the same effect, and are drawn out by the slow, looping, repetitive nature of Vaporwave's remixing. Almost every style of sampling and remixing can be found within Vaporwave songs. A sample will initially be chopped up, slowed down, and marinated with delay and reverb. Songs might employ modulation effects such as chorus, phaser, flanger, and vibrato, and others like distortion and compression. They're even further warped by EQ changes from bandpass to low-pass to even high-pass filters. Songs are looped, layered over each other, and even buried within samples of static, dialogue, and industrial drones. All of these effects have the goal of making a sample sound as though it has crawled through some kind of discombobulating wormhole from the 80s to the present, a distorted memory of a kinder past. It carries the memories we have of the jazz fusion era with its synthesizers, slap bass, chorus effects, and delayed drum set. All the experimental textures exhausted in this time period are now exaggerated to their fullest extent, creating one of the most sonically overstimulating forms of music I have ever heard. These soundtracks serenade the Vaporwave art aesthetic, a wide collection of visuals all intended with creating nostalgia for the 80s, when digital media had begun to skyrocket. Popular Vaporwave visuals consist of coconut trees, sunsets on the beach, old internet software UIs, large office buildings at night, Formula One cars, and more abstract things like random Greek and Roman statues, retro digital patterns, and literally anything magenta. To add even more to the aesthetic, we are introduced to the Vaporwave lifestyle, which I personally interpret as becoming a dripped-out fusion guitarist with a red Lamborghini Countach, surfing every day until the sun goes down, then playing smooth jazz at Miami nightclubs until it rises again. Pretty sick lifestyle if you ask me. But the best thing about Vaporwave is that it is such a wide-spanning genre that almost anyone who has access to the internet can find their own pocket of nostalgia within it. As said before, Vaporwave primarily samples genres from the 80s, such as smooth jazz and gospel. However, it has been known to sample contemporary pop music and even exhibit fully original works such as George Clanton's 100% Electronica. Because the styles of music it samples are so rich and modern, they maintain relevancy and can be heard all over the world today. If you listen to any gospel, R&B, soul, funk, blues, fusion, or smooth jazz now, you will hear so much familiarity, it's almost as if you're back in the 80s hitting that analog Vaporwave. As a jazz musician, I became obsessed with the harmony of Vaporwave and have spent many years analyzing it and learning to play the songs it samples on the electric, acoustic, and nylon guitar. Between that, growing tropical fruit trees, and becoming a general beach bum, I'd say I've dedicated a large part of my life to living within the standards of the Vaporwave aesthetic. As I mentioned before, immersion is the first step in constructing spiritual euphoria, and Vaporwave does that on a very unique level, employing anemoia as its signature method of deliverance. Anemoia is a term from John Koenig's The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, and it has become a popular term to describe a type of nostalgia for a time never lived. If you are a contemporary internet art aficionado, you've certainly experienced this emotion before, as it is the largest pillar of any industry employing retro art aesthetics. Because I was born 2 decades after the 80s, my only understanding of it comes from its portrayal in TV shows, movies, infographics, and music. Because of this, my imagined version of the decade becomes this warm, saturated, never-ending party of vibrant colors and lush nightclubs with actual groove and atmosphere. No one is ever cold, every sunset stains the sky a deep orange, everyone has so much money and style and good teeth, and they're all living in a euphoric dream of a fantasy. With this ridiculous perspective in mind, imagine that every time I hit some vaporwave for a moment, I transcend back to this impossible reality. The temporally aged rhythm guitar double stops wash over my psyche, working together with some oversaturated New York cityscape Polaroid to grab my soul and drag it off to an imagined paradise that can never exist, a figment of the spiritual realm. You might go back to interdimensional art theory and argue that if we believe in infinite possibilities, vaporwave world likely exists physically somewhere within the fifth dimension. But the physical existence of the world associated with the memory is not what is euphoric here. What is euphoric is the fact that it somehow is a memory within my mind. When I listen to vaporwave, I unlock memories I shouldn't even have. I feel as though I have lived an entire lifetime in a world that doesn't exist, as if vaporwave was one of my past lives. And going back to the original quote I opened chapter 2 with, that is what makes it possible example of transdimensional art. This goofy art aesthetic with its dozen of random kinks and lore truly makes me feel as though I have lived an entire alternate life in this world, or at least enough of one to have these vivid memories, which can only be awoken by divulging in more of it. While not as soul-transcending as the exploration of death and Everywhere at the End of Time, I have consistently experienced notably potent spiritual orgasms triggered by vaporwave, and because it is such a large, ever-expanding genre, I imagine these will continue. Now, obviously, the one massive drawback of having something this immersive is that personal preference will cut out a lot of viewers' abilities to relate to it. I know other people of my generation who are able to enjoy vaporwave due to its anemoic effects, but I don't know what effect it will have on people who are actually teenagers during the 80s, and I believe it will be a severely divergent one. As explored before, my lack of existence during the 80s has led to an overly optimistic view of what they were like, which has caused vaporwave to likely grant me more pleasure than it would someone who has seen the positives and negatives of the decades. Additionally, the extreme overuse of specific references to elements of pop culture make vaporwave so dated, some would argue that it is already a dead genre. I argue, if vaporwave is such a strange compilation of art, music, and culture that even someone who has actually lived through its reference time period does not see an accurate depiction of life within it, then there is really no way for its euphoric effects to really prefer someone based on the time period they live in. I argue that vaporwave's biggest strength is ultimately in the craftsmanship of the music it samples. Breaking down the samples, we are able to hear smooth voice leading, rich harmony, and incredible groove in the performances of greats such as Paul Jackson Jr., Jeff Lorber, and Gerald Albright. If we humor the probable possibility that music is a universal language, we find a value in vaporwave that transcends time, geography, and even culture. With all this in mind, vaporwave is an art aesthetic capable of preserving quality music while serving as a likely candidate for transdimensional art. The place that it takes my soul is truly not one that can be described within the 10 spatial dimensions. For the last 10 years of my life, I've experienced a continuously recurring dream. Within this dream, I find myself binging this unnamed popular television series on my couch, but there is an alarming twist to it. Around the show's third season, it becomes incredibly dark and gruesome, exhibiting disturbing amounts of gore and body horror. The next episodes become so hard to watch that I usually shut my laptop in fear, only to find them playing in my head. However, if I bear through these hellishly morbid elements, the show rewards me with plot continuity and storytelling so sublime and ethereal that I forgive its darkness. I found the waking version of this nightmare, and it is a web series titled Salad Fingers. If David Lynch's obscure works happen to be animated, they would be this show. David Firth's Salad Fingers effectively creates a world that gives us a glance into what other dimensions might possibly look like. It is the anti-human to humanity, achieving rare success in maintaining intriguing plot lines even while almost incomprehensibly surreal in nature. Salad Fingers contains one of the most unique and profound worlds I've encountered within a YouTube web series, crafting an atmosphere not matched in strangeness by any other channel I have found yet. The star of the show, Salad Gregory Stewart Fingers, is a green humanoid creature that lives alone in what appears to be the last freestanding structure in an empty barren wasteland devoid of natural flora and fauna. Throughout each episode, he interacts with different characters, creatures, and inanimate objects, all which are made as grossly deformed as possible within the constraints of the low detail animation. While Salad is supposed to be something of a person, he doesn't act like one whose origins came from our current world. He can regularly be found conversing with inanimate objects, which seem to have powerful effects on his psyche and even physicality. He is constantly surrounded by gore, death, and decay, yet usually remains quite happy and unstirred, as if the situation he is living in is completely normal. His values and aspirations appear inhuman by contrast to what any would consider the pursuit of human prosperity, shown through his active enjoyment in self-harm and even cannibalism. Contrary to what you might think, the show's striking nature doesn't come from the fact that Salad is abnormal by our standards. It comes from the implications that his actions, reactions, and emotions are completely normal from within his universe. The surreal idea of normalcy in a world disturbingly foreign to ours points to the concept of transdimensionality, as it makes the existence of the world of Salad Fingers appear even more impossible within our multiverse. In addition to the oddness of the show's world building, we are given the oddness of its storytelling. Framed almost like a vlog of some sort, Salad seems to narrate the events of an episode as if conscious of the presence of viewers, breaking the fourth wall. These events are usually so unremarkable that they become remarkable, at least in how they craft the aesthetic of the show. We watch patiently as Salad vlogs himself listening to the radio, looking for rusty spoons, touching stinging nettles, or having a get-together with finger puppet friends. In our inflated culture, we would normally disregard vlogs depicting such a simple lifestyle, and instead watch Nikocado Avocado eat an entire middle schooler or something. David Firth has increased our patience, curiosity, and our attention spans, somehow making vlogs about caressing rusty cutlery appealing to millions. Along with its unique style of narration, the series contains a labyrinthine temporal structure. While the show is supposedly serialized, many of the episodes do not appear to have been released in chronological order, yet don't use flashbacks or timestamps to signify this. On top of that, there are certain episodes that don't even follow linear time, bouncing back and forth between different points in it. In one scene, Salad appears to be having a conversation with no one, but if you skip ahead in the video, you can find the other side of the conversation, taking place at a completely different point in the timeline of the episode. While this convolution, in addition to the show's surreality, may make it appear pointless and unwatchable, it is actually its greatest strength. The lack of chronology within Salad Fingers' canon adds a layer of diversion, making it appear completely abstract. But when cut up and pieced back together in proper order, it all comes together to form a coherent and powerful story. According to one interpretation. While everything in Salad Fingers appears overwhelmingly intentional, it as a piece of work has not yet been solved. No one has discovered an objective meaning within it that gives us a story we as humans can fully understand, and that is what initially separates it from this universe. Salad Fingers is incredibly deliberate, yet frustratingly meaningless to us at the same time. While it seems that there is no way it can possibly contain meaning, its calculated delivery and plot continuity tell us otherwise. This doesn't necessarily characterize it as transdimensional, but it separates it from works of fiction with objective meaning, placing it somewhere within either the sixth or seventh dimension of perceivable reality. This elevates it to a work with the potential to shift spiritual consciousness, which I argue that it is effectively done, at least in me. Salad Fingers is a work of mixed media, incorporating powerfully ethereal music into its empty ambient atmosphere. Employing the heart-crushing slow harmony of synth artists such as Aphex Twin and Boards of Canada, it develops a powerfully immersive multi-sensory experience. By incorporating music that parallels the aura of its unique visuals, it becomes within itself an art aesthetic, one powerful enough to trigger profound spiritual emotions. The Lydian mode in the show's theme song, Beware the Friendly Stranger, creates a somber yet disturbing feel, drawn out through its employment of the major seventh with the tritone. The slow attack and long decay of these rich synthesizers matches the long stills and emptiness of the show's physical setting. Using lo-fi techniques such as final crackle, slowdowns, reverb, and reverse sampling, an element of nostalgia is injected into the show's overall effect. These techniques prompt the illusion that it is a distant memory, one that somehow belongs to the inner workings of our mind, even if we have not lived through it physically. While Salad Fingers supposedly alludes to many very real themes such as child neglect, war, and post-traumatic stress, I believe that its true significance is otherworldly. When watching this show, I felt as though I was transported home, back to the place I came from, as if the world of Salad Fingers was a distant past, lost beyond some rift in space-time. I really can't tell you whether that was because of its multisensory immersion, the fact that I only watched one episode a week, always during extremely late hours of the night, or something to do with my personal connections to the canon's aesthetic. This piece really is a tricky one, which I will likely dive deeper into in future videos, but to close this section, I will truthfully state that in many moments it fully encompassed my soul, making me believe that its profound metaphysical essence existed, somewhere on the spiritual plane. I've already referenced quite a lot of dreams and nighttime excursions experienced during my childhood, but now I want to talk about a certain thematic dream I've had, going back as far as my memory serves me. For some reason, my subconscious has always been extremely fascinated with the idea of exploring infinite underground structures, especially ones devoid of habitants. The first time I experienced one of these sensations was when I had a dream that I was a wizard in the Harry Potter franchise and was getting sent off to Hogwarts. I rode a train through a dark forest surrounding a large, tall, white building that the trees seemed to bow down to. The sky was a dark purple, and even though the blood-red sun shone through it continuously, this world was always trapped in an eternal night cycle. Once we got to the building, it turned out to be an infinite maze of redundant architecture, hallways, classrooms, dining areas, and more. But there were no windows anywhere, so all the lighting was artificial and fluorescent. Due to time dilation, I actually spent an entire semester in there, exploring the building's empty corridors for days. It took me months to even find a single person in that massive structure, and by the time I found some, the dream was over. Now, I was only 6 years old when I had this dream, but I considered it to be one of the best living experiences I had had up to that date due to its vividness, length, and profound surreality. From this point on, I would regularly have dreams in which I was exploring massive underground structures, usually constructed from amalgamated children's play places I had gone to in the waking world. Many of these areas were incredibly vibrant, featuring red and yellow floors, green and purple walls, and large cartoon animal murals. This childlike architecture added a layer of uncanniness that I knew didn't naturally exist in the real world. Eventually, I started retaining a significant amount of visual information from these exploits and would try to explain them to others. When I was around 8 years old, I would regularly wake up to tell my mom that I had just been exploring what I described as infinite abandoned yellow hallways miles beneath the ground. I started calling these types of dreams labyrinth dreams, recognizing their significance to my early walk through life. These dreams were so powerful to me that I would tell everyone about them as if they were the most important things I had ever experienced. I started keeping a heavily detailed dream journal in which I would record my exploits and adventures, trying to make parallels between the certain worlds I visited. Even after exploring hundreds of underground labyrinths, their surreal hold on my curiosity never lost its potency. 7 years after I started having these dreams, the first Backrooms post was made, triggering a huge wave of online internet reaction. People began crafting their own liminal space images, lore, and eventually 3D animations depicting what an exploration of these places might look like in live action. These animations found their origins with the original Backrooms found footage series, a collection of YouTube videos created by Kane Parsons, a young animator who somehow took the dreams out of my head and put them on a screen. On January 7th, 2022, Parsons' indie VFX channel Kane Pixels released a 9-minute video titled The Backrooms Found Footage. This video depicted a man no-clipping or glitching through the ground of reality and slipping into an alternate dimension housing the backrooms. In this video, we see him explore its maze-like yellow hallways along with other popular liminal spaces, all rendered in 3D for the first time in history. While technically in the horror genre, this video exhibits a lot of emptiness. Tension is built up for nearly 3 minutes as our protagonist walks through the labyrinth in silence, relieved when an uncannily terrifying entity comes to chase him down. He evades capture and wanders the maze for another silent 3 minutes before being jump-scared by the same monster and then chased down a hole. He's presumably killed, and then the video ends with the camera no-clipping its way back to the earth, giving us a way to realistically retrieve the footage. I first had the pleasure of viewing this video with a good friend of mine who is also quite into film. We found ourselves watching it in one of the most uncanny rooms I have ever been in, deep in the basement of a cabin way out in the middle of nowhere. The whole cabin itself had a design that already looked like it came from a Kane Pixels video, but being alone in the basement of it enhanced its eeriness. Now, if I'm being honest, I've seen a lot of horror in theaters and on large TVs with better sound systems, so I must say there's a limited scare potential in watching the Backrooms on your phone in the middle of the day. But there was something about this place that changed the entire gravity of the situation. Since we were already in the liminal space, watching someone explore other liminal spaces was incredibly terrifying, as it felt as though the monster from their reality could easily exist in ours. During the 2 chase scenes with the backrooms monster, we actually jumped out of our seats and audibly expressed shock. It was like we were in a room just around the corner, waiting for the monster to reach us. After having such an immersive experience with this video, I began to watch the rest of Kane Pixel's Backroom series in similar situations. I would generally view these videos alone, at 2 a.m. with noise-canceling headphones and a laptop, usually from some eerily lit place I shouldn't have been at so late at night. Immersing myself in this world under these uncanny conditions took me back to the dreams I began having as a child. It gave me the ability to visualize these dreams in waking reality while generating actual nostalgia. I had been to those places as a child. I had explored these infinite yellow hallways and giant empty structures in the most metaphysical place we as humans can interact with, the subconscious. While I admit that the backrooms is obviously a fictional concept, my fifth-dimensional definition of dreams brings out its significance as a possible transdimensional world. If we consider the idea that dreams are a look into parallel and alternate universes housed within the fifth and sixth dimension, then we can view my discussed dreams as a vehicle for traveling to these worlds. With that idea in mind, Kane Pixel's Backroom series becomes a waking vehicle for transporting us to these worlds while we are still in the third dimension. Now, by this definition, any thorough work of fiction will technically help us visualize worlds that might exist in the fifth and sixth dimension. The difference is, I have living proof through the dreams of a unified subconscious connection to these worlds that existed before their injection into the realm of artistic consciousness. Kane Pixels has obviously dedicated his life to this series because it generates a certain profound experience that is evidently relatable to millions. It isn't just entertainment. It is a focused visualization on the state of otherworldly uncanniness we find ourselves in when exploring creepy, empty buildings, consuming low-fidelity media from certain decades, or in my case, when dreaming. As impressed as we are by the craftsmanship of his 3D animation and sound design, we are simply drawn to the backrooms because of how they make us feel. As mentioned in the beginning of this essay, liminal spaces may be more profound to people of my generation since they employ forms of architecture and interior design just young enough to be nostalgic but old enough to feel foreign. However, even with that limitation, I believe that the universal feelings expressed through Kane Pixels and others' Backroom series are evident of a higher power of consciousness. Whether the Backrooms exists in a higher dimension or not, all of us watching videos of them seem to experience remarkably similar emotions. They aren't just scary, they're scary in an uncanny yet familiar way, as if we have all agreed that they exist outside of our reality and are afraid that at any moment we might no-clip into them. These videos are brought to us as found footage documentaries claiming that they exist within the canon of the world, which makes it very easy to fantasize that they are actually real. Now, as a disclaimer, I will say, there are plenty of naive young people that believe the Backrooms videos animated in Blender are actual found footages and actively fear no clipping, and I will agree that these people are kinda dumb. But I will say that the Backroom series has proved that my dreams are not purely a fictional concept limited to the walls of my particular mind. While it is unlikely that we are all receiving subconscious messages from some higher dimensional realm, I believe that there is a part of our psyche united by the Backrooms. So many people seem to express similar profound emotions when viewing them that I can't help but feel as though they are products of the transdimensional realm. When I watch a Backrooms found footage, I know it is real, not as a physical place, but as a visual representation of the mental state we find ourselves in when traversing the uncanny, whether in dreams or reality. When watching a found footage, I feel as though I am looking at memories from a life I lived in this alternate dimension, usually only accessible through dreams. I really feel as though these events come from some version of my past, and I am somehow being reunited with them through these pieces of media, even though this is unlikely. And the Backrooms is ultimately a work of complete fiction. Its immersive nature is strong enough to convince me of its tangible existence, at least in spirit, and that is something truly transdimensional. Each of the 6 works of art/art aesthetics I have primarily focused on have been very personal and subjective in the ways they have triggered spiritual transcendence within myself and in their niche and avant-garde nature. Many of you viewing this video may have never even experienced any of the works described, and so may feel that transdimensionality is something too personal to be a universal concept. But I want to argue that even as powerful as it is, spiritual transcendence doesn't necessarily require immersing yourself in a mixed media form of art as surreal and abstract as the ones previously mentioned. Radiohead is a British quote-unquote rock band that I think most will agree is well known across the globe and critically acclaimed as one of the greatest musical groups on the planet. Whether you can agree with this statement or not, we can acknowledge the fact that Radiohead has objectively influenced and affected millions of people across its multiple decades of existence. I, like many others, grew up listening to Radiohead and was spiritually moved by the conglomeration of its beautifully dissonant harmonies, heartbreakingly emotional performances, poetic lyricism, experimental timbres, and musically equivalent cover art. While I know I said that this band's music was an alternative to high immersion mixed media surrealism, I kinda lied, because it definitely takes a lot of work to get into, and once you're in, you can't really leave, at least for a good season of life. However, even with these constraints, Radiohead still manages to be one of the most popular and successful bands of the times, supporting its claim to universal transdimensionality. When formulating my original list of transdimensional works, I wrote that Radiohead was a solid candidate because it makes the listener feel emotions humans are not able to experience naturally. I stand by this statement, and I feel there isn't much more to explain. Radiohead is simply otherworldly, and I feel like many here will agree with me. When listening to songs like There, How to Disappear Completely, or Weird Fishes, I feel sorrows too obscure for even John Koenig's dictionary. I feel the power of music expressing emotions that language fails to describe. My soul truly escapes to a place not definable by physics or any tangible school of thought. If Radiohead can generate a profound spiritual orgasm, what's to keep any genre of music from achieving such enlightenment? To this day, the most powerful soul transcension I have ever experienced was in a black gospel church. Now, I know church is the most obvious place for people to encounter spiritual transcendence. I mean, that's basically the whole point of it. But I had never experienced one before in such a setting, and I have to say that one experience still holds more weight than anything I have discussed today. I saw a place not connected to this world by any bridge we can physically see or touch, but I felt it. It revealed its existence to me through a song more soulful than anything I've ever heard, sung by people who all knew where they were going. Everyone around me simultaneously acknowledged the existence of this place, as we all went up for a brief moment away from the grip of the tangible world. Now, so far, we have found works of art stemming from forms such as architecture, easel art, music, literature, theater, film, and sculpture. And within these classifications, specific forms of media such as photography, graphic novel, serialized drama, hand-drawn animation, and 3D animation. And I don't play video games, but if I did, I might add games such as BioShock or Outer Wilds to the list. By incorporating basically every type of art, transdimensional art proves that it knows no boundaries. Its universality isn't limited to a subject's preference or physical restraints. But believe it or not, it goes even further than that. Most of the pieces we have talked about have been intentional. By intentional, I mean that the works were created with the intention of being art in addition to entertainment. Or in the case of Urbex, that the appreciation of these works was intentionally artistic in nature. But what if I tell you that it is possible to experience the feeling of spiritual transcendence without actively searching for it? I have experienced a remarkable amount of moments in my life in which I felt connected to a distant memory, a memory of a world that I had not grown up in, and that likely existed in a parallel universe outside my dimension. Rather than being triggered by any art, these moments were triggered by lighting, setting, temperature, feeling, and smell. They would sometimes happen in elementary school when it was a hot day in June and I was way out under the only tree on the blacktop, basking in the orange glow of the sun, reading Captain Underpants with my friends. I wasn't excited because school was soon getting out for summer. I was excited because with the new chunk of free time, I might be able to read or write a book that took me to a faraway place, one fantastical and foreign, but still holding the comforts I enjoyed while sitting there in the warm sun. Or leaning up against a shaded wall in Cambodia town during fall as the Santa Ana winds dry up the atmosphere so that the sun shines through sharply but coldly, making the shadows in the evening long. The expertly grown tropical fruit trees invading the front yards around me illusion me enough that I believe I'm in an equatorial city that somehow manages to feel comfortably dry, cool climates. I'm deep within the massive Taiwan International Airport, and the perfect white lights and walls around me tell me I'm in a Fruitager Aero commercial from the future. I'm jet-lagged and rendered delirious by the foreign nature of this massive human construction, amazed by the people coming from everywhere and going everywhere else with its assistance. The interior illumination in the aquarium of the Pacific is always heavenly in the Gobi tank. The perfectly flat artificial lighting mixes supremely with the rays of the sun as the outside seeps in. The walls ripple with gray projections of the crystal water, lightly bouncing up and down. The monochromatic blue backgrounds of the tanks deceive me. I am at the bottom of the ocean, the top of the sea, in a dry room, and touched by the sun all at once. It is a dry, gray afternoon, and I am in class on the second floor. It is a hot night in Texas. I am at my friend's house. It is blue hour, and all the lights are off in my apartment. It's a humid midnight, and I am in bed staring out the window. I am dreaming. All of these situations are experiences I have had that have briefly given me moments of spiritual transcendence, equally, if not more powerful than those experienced when consuming the previously discussed pieces of art. These situations are only third-dimensional. They are raw, natural moments of unintentional beauty painted by the brush of life and meant to show us that there is an order to the chaos that exists outside our realm, poking its head through once in a while. When enjoying one of these occurrences, I feel like I am remembering a sublime past, or maybe a future. These moments are always so perfect in temperature, lighting, smell, and feeling, that memories of them feel like memories from an impossibly utopian world that must only exist outside our system, a glimpse of what a possible heaven on earth might look like, if only for a minute. In these fleeting moments, the world is in complete harmony. Many of these situations make use of man-made structures and artificial lighting, but there are some that don't even use either, and while the lack of the indication of a human presence makes them a bit difficult to interpret as a human, they can be made just as powerful. Many of these experiences are made euphoric by the sun alone. There's a certain particular sensation I have had since I was in 5th grade, which I call bright day. It is a powerful contentment triggered by any perfectly blue day in which the sun shines down directly overhead for hours. The grass is perfectly green, the air is crisp but comfortable, and everything is still and quiet. Not a breeze blows, and all that can be heard are the birds. There's a hike on the Portuguese Bend that I have done with friends possibly hundreds of times. The path trails off and heads down a mountain, through the dry brush, and onto some scenic spots overlooking an ocean so blue you can't tell where it meets the sky. Almost every time I complete this hike, the conditions are as mentioned. The day is so bright and perfect that it almost feels like we are in a video game simulation of some sort. There are many particular elements of nature that trigger similar feelings in me when harmoniously combined. Purple sunsets on the beach in Oahu, a hike through the waterless desert, finding cloudberries in a Norwegian forest, the sky encased in clouds so that it looks like we are in a cozy white dome filled with luscious greenery completely untouched by humanity. These situations give me a glimpse of what a perfectly balanced world might look like. Their memory in my mind is so unblemished that it feels fake, as if it originated in an alternate universe with complete flawlessness, impossible within our 10th-dimensional realm. This is the beauty of existence. It doesn't require intentionally man-made art or even the presence of humans. As a human being, we have been gifted with the beauty of life and the beauty of nature. Perfection is subjective, and so we all have the ability to experience moments that might take us out of reality. We all have the ability to find traces of the spiritual realm on Earth. We just have to be looking for them. If there's one thing that I've already learned this year, it's that the future is worryingly uncertain. The Los Angeles fires have ravaged neighborhoods of Altadena, one of my favorite towns and a place holding some of the most incredible architectural, artistic, and natural beauty I've ever seen. TikTok just got banned, then unbanned, Elon Musk's spaceship blew up, and now Donald Trump will become the new president of my country, shifting its narrative in a completely different direction. Climate change, war, and genocide rage on, presenting us with the only question we should be asking: when will I be next? We don't know. Nothing appears certain in these times, except that technology will certainly outlive them. We can't seem to control the destructive and unpredictable events around us, or even the predictable ones. So what can we control? Living in the moment is a fairly abstract concept that has been preached upon by many of the world's greatest thinkers across centuries. I'm not telling you to disassociate from reality and ignore social and global issues until they implode, but for those of you who are living, but don't know what you are living for, past, present, or future, I offer you a way of thinking that equalizes all of us, from the most powerful, rich, and successful to those with the least. I began this essay trying to define transdimensional art so that I could find more of it, because it was so powerful, yet incredibly infrequent. I now know that transdimensional art is not an actual type of art governed by definable constructs, but a way of thinking about life. If we look hard enough, we can find beauty and spiritual profundity anywhere. The only rule is that we have to be alive to experience it. I've experienced moments of spiritual transcendence in classrooms, abandoned buildings, and even deserts. I will acknowledge that I may be more privileged than others across the world, but I have to argue that I could have nothing but my eyes, no, my ears, no, just my ability to sense physical touch. And I could sit outside on the planet we call Earth and feel the temperature in the air, feel the wind and sun, or lack thereof, and know that I exist within the world. Heck, we all have the ability to dream. With access to the subconscious realm, we can literally escape to the spirit world every single night if we want. If we live our daily lives with the goal of reaching enlightenment, be it through profound art, human connection, or simply the beauty of living, we can achieve sensations of satisfaction and contentment that money cannot buy. Nothing I have ever spent money on has been as powerful as these raw experiences. If we place the goal of achieving this euphoria at the center of our life, we can now control our well-being, and no one can get in the way of it. For the last few years, I lived with the idea that the richest person in the world is the one who knows of the best art, and I now feel that this is overwhelmingly true. Heroin addicts say that their drug feels like heaven, likely producing some of the most powerful euphoria that humans are capable of feeling. Transdimensional transcendence is the best feeling I have ever experienced as a human being on this earth, and likely parallels the potency of the strongest opioids. It is a drug that takes nothing from you, not even money, yet it gives you everything. You don't need to be rich to consume this art, you don't even need an internet connection. I've experienced the same feelings while listening to Everywhere at the End of Time as I have while literally just sitting outside. We have to realize that at the end of the day, no one's physical wealth can save them. In the wake of the LA fires and concurrent destruction across the world, we now realize that all things can be taken away. Nothing is physically preservable through the test of time except attitude. As human beings, we are transdimensional art. We are consciousness. We are what gives meaning and what makes things meaningless by contrast. If we can find a way to live our daily lives with minds open to noticing life's fleeting moments of profound beauty, we can become the most metaphysically rich, spiritually satisfied beings on the planet. So the next time you discover a moment of transdimensionality, hold it close and don't let go.